Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming to this amazing talk. Today, we are presenting Angular and Tailwind CSS because we are attending to their wedding. They're getting married today. So we're super excited. And you can see this lovely couple, Angular and Tailwind, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So who am I? I'm a senior developer advocate for OneSignal, and OneSignal is a company that specializes in push notifications, SMS, emails, and all that kind of stuff to make sure that you are engaging your application with your end users. I'm also a Google Woman Tech Maker, Stack Overflow contributor, MD for Cloudinary, Auth0 Ambassador, Trillo Champ, and Springboard Mentor. But I'm not here to talk about me. I'm here to talk about the lovely couple. So the first thing that we have to know is what is Tailwind CSS? Tailwind CSS is a utility-first CSS framework packed with classes like Flex, PT4, Text Center, and Rotate 90 that can be composed to build any design directly in your markup, right? I forgot to translate that part right there, but essentially it says advantages of Tailwind CSS, so my apologies. So some of the advantages of Tailwind CSS are that since you're not going to really be focusing your time on your CSS, right? You're going to be focusing your time more on your business logic. So you're going to have more time for your business logic because since the CSS classes are already pre-made for you, you don't have to spend the time on that aspect, right? Like I was telling you, it has the classes already made and you can combine them with each other the same way that you do it with any CSS class that you actually create from scratch, right? Once you have these classes already created in your CSS, whenever you made them from scratch, all you have to do to use them, you go to your HTML and use them right there. Well, it's the same case with Tailwind, right? You're only skipping one step. Since they already have the classes already made for you, all you have to do is put them in your HTML the same way that you've been doing it forever. It's very light in production. And I want to highlight this part because whenever you're in development mode, it's actually really heavy. And I'm going to show you a trick on how to make sure that Tailwind goes on a diet to make sure that it's ready to look good for the wedding, right? Because Tailwind is actually really heavy if you don't purge Tailwind. Tailwind is mobile first, meaning that all the CSS classes are going to be mobile friendly from start, right? So some people usually try to develop applications starting with desktop view, and then they create some media queries to adapt their application into a mobile view or make it mobile friendly. But in this case, it's actually the opposite. Tailwind starts from mobile screens, and from there it goes to desktops, right? You don't have to do the media queries. They already have that for you. All you have to do is add some CSS classes to your HTML. So no worries about any kind of media queries that you have to implement. Tailwind CSS is extendable and customizable, right? Meaning whenever you're working, for example, with frameworks like Bootstrap, sometimes I feel like really hacky that I had to go to the actual file back in the days and start like modifying and tweaking things, right? With Tailwind, it makes the configuration very easy for you, making it very friendly, right? I think that's one of the main advantages from Tailwind CSS, because for me, Tailwind CSS is an awesome tool to start building a design system for a company that you're working on, right? Because you don't want to be having to copy paste all these classes all over the applications you may have. All you have to do is just customize the your Tailwind config files, and then from there you start building your design system however you want it. You can use the Tailwind the old school way, and I'm going to show you guys later on in the talk what I mean with old school. But let's just leave it open for right now as the old school way. And VS Code extension, you have a VS Code extension for Tailwind, which is going to help your developer experience to be better, right? But let's be real, not everything is amazing with Tailwind. Tailwind has some disadvantages, right? And some of those disadvantages, in my personal opinion, are that if you don't really know CSS, I suggest you to like remove your hands out of the Tailwind, right? Because you're not going to be practicing Tailwind CSS that much. Another disadvantage, like I was telling you, is that it's actually heavy if you don't purge it, right? And I'm gonna be talking about purging and what it does and what it is later on in the talk. But those are some of the things that you have to contemplate about Tailwind CSS. Also, another problem that I see is that a lot of people tend to have the bad practice of having a lot of CSS classes in your HTML. Later in the talk, I'm gonna show you how to prevent all that. Now, in this talk, I'm going to show you how to install Tailwind CSS in your Angular app, right? And there's two ways of doing it. The first one is by using the schematic ngNeat Tailwind. That is very useful for Angular applications that are using a version lower than 11.2. The other one is the native support in Angular, and that's the reason why Angular and Tailwind are getting married, because now Angular has native support for Tailwind, right? Starting in our 11.2.0 version. So thanks to these two guys that you see on the screen, we have the ngNeat Tailwind schematic, right? So thank you so much to Chan and Vimen for bringing this up, this amazing tool for the community. So we appreciate you guys for that. And all you have to do for you to start using the schematic in your application is to run the command that you see on the screen that says ng-add at ngNeat-tailwind. And this is what happens whenever you run it. As you can see, I'm running the command, and it's going to ask me if I want to run dark mode. I click class, as you can see. Then I can select if I Tailwind directives and components if I want them to add them, and I click yes. Right. Also, Tailwind CSS, since it's a really huge CSS framework library, it gives you the option of installing plugins as you need. Right. Some of those plugins are the typography and the forms, and all you have to do in the schematic is just select what kind of plugin do you want. For example, I'm selecting forms and typography, as you can see. And those are the ones that are going to be installed into my Tailwind configuration for me to use them in my Angular application. So as you know, this schematic is doing a lot of the things for you, right? All you have to do is just enter one command, and then you just select the options or configurations that you want, which is amazing, right? But now, thanks to the native support for Tailwind in Angular, we don't really need this, right? But essentially, whenever you're running this schematic, this is what happens in the background in your application. You run the schematic, and then you're gonna see in your index.html file this class that says dark. Why? Because we added the dark mode using our schematic. In the command line, we select the dark, and then this class right here gets added. Another thing that happens in the background for us is that it adds these imports, as you can see, in our styles.css file. So that's essentially what it does for you, and then you can start using Tailwind in your Angular application like you have always done it before. Well, now here comes the interesting part. This is like us getting ready for the wedding. So Tailwind in Angular for versions greater or equal to 11.2. So yes, they're getting married. We're super excited for the support. And now it's time for us to get our hands dirty. So the first thing that I want to do is go to the Tailwind CSS documentation, right? As you can see in the documentation, I mean, you can see some examples, right? And that's all good. But something I really like about Tailwind is that it kind of like makes me feel they understand my language. And what I mean with language, I mean English, the way I think or speak about CSS, right? So I'm just going to give you an example. Let's pretend that you want to use flex, right? So all you have to do is just literally type flex, right? And it tells you flex direction, flex grow, flex right here. Awesome. And then you can see the classes that they have already created for you, right? For example, flex auto, flex initial, and then it gives you the actual property or the actual value they integrated into the CSS class, right? For example, they're using flex in this part, and then they put flex initial. So you see how they're combining the same way the CSS classes like you have done it in your other applications with CSS. I mean, in this case, you just don't have to do it from scratch. That's what it is, right? Let's look at another example. Let's pretend that I want to give some space between two elements in a horizontal way, right? So I have two elements and I want to give a space between them. So since I'm talking about space, the first thing that I will think about is typing space, right? So space between, maybe this will be it. Okay, cool, yes. So utilities for controlling the space between child elements. Pretty cool, right? So as you can see, it says space y0, space y1, and so on. And what do they mean with y? In this case, y represents the y-axis. So this is gonna be a class that applies a space between your elements in a vertical way, right? And if I keep scrolling down, I have the one for x-axis as well, which means it's gonna do it in a horizontal way. As you can see, here's an example, right? That they have, it says flex, and then just to make sure the elements are in a horizontal way, right? And I'm giving a space of x4 between them. And as you can see, these like lines right here in this element are representing the space. So that's essentially what Tailwind CSS is doing for us. And you can see what is the actual value that they integrated into the CSS class. Another thing important to note is, sure, as you can see, they're using X4, right? And just to give you an example, X4 can translate to be, just to say something, 4 pixels, right? But since Tailwind CSS is very easy to customize and change the configuration, this can actually be in your own application. Instead of being 4 pixels, it can become 4 rems, for example, right? It's really easy to customize. So now we already have like a feeling of how CSS classes are working with Tailwind CSS, it's time for us to decorate the wedding invite for Angular and Tailwind CSS, because as you can see, like really ugly, and we want them to live happy forever after. So might as well let's give them a hand and start making this application a little bit cuter, right? So as you can see, I have this super, super complex Angular application with just one component, and I'm just like joking. It's not rocket science what I have right here. All I have is just literally the one component. And the reason being is because I don't want to confuse you guys with other things, since we're mainly focusing with Tailwind CSS, right? So the first thing that I have to do is install Tailwind into my Angular application. So I'm going to do npm install -d Tailwind CSS, and we're going to give it a few seconds to install. Fingers crossed that it doesn't crash my VS Code. Everything looks good. Awesome. Now, the next and very, very important step is the following. I have to create a Tailwind configuration file. So I'm going to go right here and I'm going to create that file in my root folder. So Tailwind config.js. Perfect. And I'm just going to copy this code that I have over here and I'm going to explain it to you guys. Because of course, I don't know it by heart. I'm not that smart like you guys. You guys probably can like just type it like that. I can't. But essentially, this is our configuration file for Tailwind, right? And remember, whenever I was showing you how to use the schematic, I was talking about dark mode and applying class. Well, this is where it's coming from. In this case, you are adding the dark mode class manually, right? You don't have to do it. This is just for me to show you essentially the same that the schematic was doing in the background for us. Then when I was showing the schematic, I was talking as well about plugins, right? So you might be wondering, well, when are the plugins coming in place whenever I'm doing the installation in our Angular application with a version 11.2 or greater? Well, right here, it says plugins and it's an array. And as you can see, I'm adding the forms and the typography plugin. But for us to actually be able to use them, we have to install the npm package, right? So we're gonna go ahead and install the typography package. Awesome, perfect. So now I'm gonna install the other npm package, which is the one for forms. Beautiful. Now the next step is, remember that we were talking about us having to, with the schematic, well, the schematic in the background adds the imports of Tailwind for you. In this case, since we're doing everything manually, you have to do it yourself. And all you have to do is do this inside of your styles CSS, which we are importing the Tailwind CSS classes. Perfect. Now, from there, we just gotta test our application. Let's see if everything works. Hopefully I didn't break anything. So I'm gonna do ng serve. Okay, fingers crossed. Let's wait a few seconds. It's building. This is the moment of truth. If it doesn't work, you don't owe me a beer anymore. But if it works, you owe me like 2 or 3. Okay. Perfect. Awesome. So if built, let's see if it actually worked. So I'm gonna go over here and there you go. I'm gonna refresh this page. Awesome. Tailwind is working. Tailwind is installed, but it doesn't look as cute as we wanted. So let's just do a little bit better with the styling, right? So I'm gonna go back, and also something that I wanted to talk about is look how heavy my application is. This is 8.69 megabytes. That's a huge no-no, right? And this part right here where you see styles, look how heavy Tailwind is. It's 5.86 megabytes. That's crazy. That's not good at all, but I'm gonna show you how to prevent that. But first, let's go to the most important part. Let's give it some styling to Tailwind CSS. So as you can see, this is one huge thing that I don't like about Tailwind. You see how I am adding all these CSS classes into my HTML? That's actually really bad. It's ugly, right? Because that can make it harder for people to read your HTML. So the first thing that we can do is literally copy this and then just give it a name of wrapper. And if I go to my CSS file, I already created that class for you guys. And all I had to do is use this keyword from Tailwind, which is apply, and then you paste the CSS classes from Tailwind that you want to use, right? Which is amazing because now, if I go back to my HTML, then it looks fairly clean. This is all I have, right? In this case, for example, I have another one that I created for you guys, which is the button one. And if I go to the button class, I already have the styling that I want to give it to my button, right? So this is like the old school way that I was like talking about, right? Applying the CSS classes in from Tailwind in your actual CSS file. Now let's see. Let's do a little bit better with our application. So what I want to do is have the Angular icon on the left and have the Tailwind icon on the right. That way it reads in a better way Angular and Tailwind, right? So how would I do that? So the first thing that I will think about is using flex, right? So I type flex and I scroll down and it's telling me to use flex because that is going to apply the display flex CSS property. So over here, I'm going to type flex and I want them to be center with each other because as you can see, they don't have the same height, right? One has 44 and the other one 24 pixels. So if I say this, it's probably gonna look a little bit wonky. Oh, yes, it definitely looks wonky. We don't like that. So let's put more work into this. If I go back to this part, I'm gonna type items center, and as you can see how I'm getting the auto completions thanks to the this is thanks to the VS Code plugin. Items center, right? I'm gonna save it and let's see how it looks. Okay, it's looking better, but as you can see, my eye is touching my icon right here, and I don't really like that. So what can we do? As I was telling you guys before, we can add some space. So once again, we go to the Tailwind documentation and we type space between, and let's see, because I don't remember everything, how it works. Space, let's see, maybe I click on the wrong one. Okay, perfect. This is what I wanted. So if I scroll down, since I want to give some space between them in a vertical way, right? I'm gonna use the one that says space X, and let's just apply the space X4. So I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna type space X4. I'm gonna save it. And awesome, that looks way better. Awesome, perfect. So that's cool, right? That's cool. And as you can see right here, I'm using these predefined Tailwind classes as well, right? No problem. Let's see how this looks in mobile view. Since it's already responsive, it's already done for us, right? Really cool. We don't have to worry about that aspect as well. Now, let's talk about the bundle size, which is a very important topic in this case. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna build my application. So I'm gonna type ngbuild --prod, and let's wait to see what happens. Let's just give it a few seconds. Also, one disadvantage that I have seen, in my personal opinion, with Tailwind is that it will take you like 30 minutes to grasp the idea of how Tailwind works, right? Because you're going to have to go back and look at the classes, right? Because you might know them. Thankfully, it's good because you, like I was telling you, it's very familiar, very similar to the English language. So, okay. Perfect example. Now that my building is completely done, once again, now my build is 4.9 megabytes, which is, no, that's a big no-no, right? So we're gonna use a strategy that it's called purging. Purging means that we are gonna get rid of the CSS classes that we are not using in our application. Like I said, Tailwind CSS has created a lot of CSS classes for you, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be using all of them, right? For example, right here, I'm just using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever number, but I'm not using all of them. So we are going to do some purging in our application. It's actually fairly simple. So all I have to do is in this part right here where it says purge, I'm going to add a new line, and I'm going to add this property called enable, right? And I'm gonna do it every time I'm running in production mode, right? So I'm gonna, now what I have to do next is set my environment flag to production and run ngbuild again. So let's run it. As you can see, I entered the command right here, node environment production, ngbuild --prod. Fingers crossed that this purging is gonna work. Chris is crossing his fingers, hoping that it's gonna work as well. So it actually worked. Awesome. So as you can see now, you can see the size of my CSS class being 4.56 kilobytes, which is actually really, really small. Now, if you compare it to the one over here, it's 4.78 megabytes, right? So huge difference. We're not having the red flag from by the CLI telling us, hey, buddy, you gotta get on a diet before you go on your wedding day again. So this is what essentially Tailwind and CSS is integrate into our Angular application. So just before I let you guys go, my personal opinion, right? Because I think whenever we talk about tools, we need to talk about how good they are and how bad they are, and when should we use them and when we shouldn't use them. I will only use Tailwind CSS if I'm creating a design system for a company, right? I think that's the only reason why, because you might have people in your company that they are not really familiar with CSS, right? And you want them to practice and be better, right? So if there's a bug or something, or like a wonky behavior with CSS in Tailwind, you're gonna have to like figure out yourself, and it can get a little bit like maybe a little bit complicated for you. But if you actually want to see what the CSS classes from Tailwind are looking like, it's very easy. So as you can see, for example, let's look at this one right here from the button. If I inspect, I have, well, not the button, but let's say the text. These are CSS classes already created for us by Tailwind, right? And I'm zooming in. And if I click in here, right, I can see what is the properties that they added for us. You see, this is what Tailwind is adding in the background for us. So if you want to like start debugging, you can do it. And, you know, like I'm changing the colors right now and all that kind of stuff. You can do it the same way, but I think it's going to be easier for someone to debug if they actually grow the code for these themselves, right? Like I said, for a design system, I think it's an amazing tool. It's going to save your developers a lot of time, but I don't know if I will use it for an application where I don't really need a design system, right? For example, this part right here, the simple component, not to brag about it, but I honestly think that I could have styled it myself in a few minutes, right? Just because I already know how CSS works. But now in this case, since I'm not like super knowledgeable about Tailwind, I had to go back to Tailwind CSS and look for the classes. So that's one disadvantage, right? But of course, if you have a design system, then you don't have to really worry about that kind of stuff, because all of your developers have to do is just use your install system how you want it, and then just really arrange elements inside of your HTML. Finally, I have a tutorial and I have a GitHub repo. The GitHub repo is essentially what you guys saw me writing the code. And this is a tutorial that I wrote on Dev2, right? And if we go over here, so these are like step-by-step steps on how to integrate Tailwind into your Angular application that has a version greater than the 1.2.0 or the same one, or using the schematic like we were talking about. And finally, I mean, I talk about advantages and disadvantages of Tailwind CSS as well, because like I said, I think it's something that is important to mention to everyone whenever you suggest a tool. So thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Hopefully you guys enjoy it.